All right. We're so glad to have you all with us today for an artist talk with Ashley Minner. Before jumping into introductions, I want to read a land acknowledgement authored by the First Nations Graduate Circle here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We acknowledge that the land on which the University of North Carolina stands is the ancestral homeland of Eastern Siouan-speaking Indigenous peoples, Yassat the people. We honor and acknowledge a commitment to serve the citizens of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Kohari Indian Tribe, the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, the Haliwa-Saponi Indian Tribe, the Saponi, the Meherrin Nation, the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, and the Waccamaw Siouan Tribe, who, along with citizens of other tribal nations, comprise one of the largest populations of Indigenous people east of the Mississippi River. My thanks to the First Nations Graduate Circle for creating and sharing this statement. I'm Alice Whiteside, head of the Sloan Art Library at UNC Chapel Hill, and today's program is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Every Book a Mirror, Book Artists Engage with the 21st Century, which is on display at the North Carolina Collection Gallery in the Wilson Special Collections Library. Co-curated by myself and my colleague Josh Hawkinsmith, the exhibit features socially engaged artist books and zines from the past 20 years. And I want to give a shout out to Josh, not only for his incredible work on the exhibition, but also for organizing today's talk with Ashley Minner, whose book Exquisite Lumbee is one of the featured works. And it's my great honor and delight to introduce Ashley today. I want to give a little bit of housekeeping, which is that please, I'd ask you all to please submit questions to the Q&A box, and we will get to those after Ashley's talk. Ashley Minner is a community-based visual artist from Baltimore, Maryland, and an enrolled member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. She earned her MFA in Community Arts from the Maryland Institute College of Art and her PhD in American Studies from the University of Maryland, College Park. In addition to maintaining her artistic practice, she works as an assistant curator for history and culture at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. Ashley Minner will share about her practice as a community-based visual artist and tell the story of the Exquisite Lumbee, one of her best known and most widely shown work projects to date. A collaboratively produced body of work featuring life-size photo portraits and an artist book, which borrows its form from a surrealist game, the Exquisite Lumbee invites the world to see a particular community of people in a particular place on their own terms.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you to the Sloan Art Library for acquiring this work and for inviting me to give a talk today. Special thanks to Josh, who unfortunately can't be with us, but who shepherded me through this whole process and did such a beautiful job planning and curating everything, and who is a wonderful book artist in his own right, and I didn't even know. So let me show you some images as I speak, because that's what I like to do. I'll begin by giving my own kind of land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you today from the place now known as Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm sure by now everybody knows about this wonderful resource online, nativeland.ca, which is a community-sourced website out of Canada, whereby you can search, I think at this point, anywhere in the world to see whose land you're occupying and what treaties affect that place, what languages are spoken. So up until a few years ago, if you looked up the entire state of Maryland, it would say it was Piscataway territory. And the place now known as Baltimore is indeed part of the traditional Piscataway homeland, but just as a nod to librarians and archivists and people who do archival research, until fairly recently, people forgot that the place that is now known as Baltimore was actually ceded to the colony of Maryland in 1652 by treaty with the Susquehannock, who were folks who kind of migrated further north into Pennsylvania, and a host of other Indigenous peoples have passed through and lived here, stopped here, since time immemorial. It may surprise you to know that the largest group of American Indian people in the Baltimore region are not Indigenous to Maryland. We are descended from folks who come from a very wide swath of territory, as far north as the James River in Virginia, and as far south as the Great Peatee River in South Carolina. We coalesced in a place now known as Robeson County. Prior to the establishment of the United States, we were fleeing disease and colonial warfare, and became a cohesive group. And today we're known as the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. We take our name from the Lumbee River, which winds its way through our tribal territory. This is it here. It's kind of dark and murky. It's otherwise known as Drowning Creek. My mom was baptized in this river. I can hardly believe it. And what doesn't look like the river in the swamp looks a lot like this. It's still a very rural place. I snapped this picture myself some years ago. If you're familiar, this is a field of tobacco. And in the time my mom was growing up and her parents still lived in tribal territory, that was the main cash crop of the area. And many people were tobacco farmers, and finding themselves dispossessed of their tribal homeland through the Southern agricultural system, they ended up sharecropping. Also, a lot of people, which, those who lived through it will tell you that's like another form of slavery. It's just a really hard way to live. And today you won't see as many tobacco fields. If you visit Lumbee tribal territory, there's more like soybeans and other crops. But here's a family photo. This is my mom and my uncles and my grandma when they were a farming family in Robeson County. And my mom complains when I show this photo sometimes because she says it makes it look like they were so poor they didn't have clothes. They did have clothes. It was summer. They were just outside, see, they had clothes. But living wasn't easy. And also in this part of the world, in this time, there was tri-racial segregation, right? So 3 separate school systems, one for white kids, one for Black kids, one for Indian kids, 3 sections in the movie theater. Really something most folks don't think of or consider, know existed when we think of this era in the Southern United States. So for a few reasons, really good reasons, Lumbee started to migrate out of Robeson County in the first part of the 20th century en masse, seeking work and a better quality of life further north usually. Lore has it that it was World War II soldiers like my grandfather here who passed through major cities like Baltimore, Detroit, and Philadelphia and found out it would be way easier to make a living working in a factory rather than farming somebody else's land to grow tobacco with your whole family for very little return in a place where you're a second-class citizen. And that is true. And they left the river and the swamp and the fields for a place that looks like this. This is Baltimore Harbor and a shot by A. Aubrey Bodine in the 1950s. And you can see it's a very different place. It's also a place where folks weren't expecting an influx of American Indians, and to this day are kind of surprised we're here when they find out. Especially ones that look nothing like the Indians they were watching on TV on Gunsmoke, Bonanza, etc., with a really heavy, particular Southern accent. The World War II soldiers, I think, did kick off the mass migration, but in my own research, I found a photo of this guy who turns out was actually the uncle by marriage of my great-grandfather. This is Dr. Governor Worth Locklear, who was an 1893 graduate of Baltimore University Schools of Medicine. And he left North Carolina where he couldn't get an education and came to Baltimore to get it. And it turns out the school he attended was sort of right across the street from this area, which most Lumbees moved to beginning in the 1940s. This small part of East Baltimore was so heavily populated by Lumbee Indians that they started to refer to it as their reservation affectionately, because it was a place where they could go to be understood and see people who looked like them, who understood them, who came from where they came from. And the arrow on the map is actually pointing to a street where to a house that doesn't exist, on a street that doesn't exist anymore, where my great-grandfather was living when he died in 1948. So Lumbees have a decent history in Baltimore, and my family has been part of it for, I haven't found anybody who was up here earlier before Dr. Locklear. When Lumbees got to Baltimore, they started to have access to more opportunities and technologies. Here's some ladies at the corner of Baltimore and Broadway Street. You can see this is in the 1940s. Their hair's done, they have nice clothes. You see all the cars in the background. Many homes in Robeson County weren't even wired for electricity at this point. Also, Baltimore had its own set of problems. It was kind of like out of the frying pan and into the skillet. As I mentioned, people weren't expecting Indians, didn't understand Indians when they showed up. And but because my family made the move to Baltimore and got established here, like Governor Worth Locklear got his education here, I was able to also, who would imagine the grandchild of people who were farming tobacco in Robeson County a generation earlier would be able to go study art in the Western Academy at Maryland Institute College of Art. And here I am with my best friend Rhea in 2005 when we graduated. And I learned drawing, painting, printmaking, sculpture, and all of the things that you learn in the Western Academy of Art. And then I came home to my community. Here's the Baltimore American Indian Center, established by Lumbee people in Baltimore in 1968, though it wasn't in this building at the time, but this is where it is today. And started doing art with young people that looked very different than what I was learning in school. I became a community artist and a popular educator, meaning I work with everybody, people who can't read even, or are pre-literate even. And you can see, it was youth run, youth led. There's the rules in the back that the young people came up with. I think it says class laws. So their language and our vocabulary words. You see some cyanotypes hanging in the back. Our talking stick. So this was a good time. I want to say 15, 20 years ago now, getting to be an old lady. And I did a lot of work with young people. And I will get to the book. I have to give you this context so you'll understand where it came from. In the time my mom was growing up in North Carolina, there was very little intermarriage. If you wanted to be in a relationship with or have kids with or marry someone who wasn't Lumbee, pretty much you had to leave the area. Not only was it socially unacceptable, it was illegal. So when people moved 400 miles north to Baltimore, they got into relationships with and married and had kids with everybody. So every ethnicity and race we have in East Baltimore, pretty much there is a Lumbee version of that now. We have Lumbee Mexicans, Greek Lumbees, Polish Lumbees, Afro-Cuban Lumbees, and the young people. So now we're a few generations in. These young people that I was working with here are truly multiracial, multi-ethnic people. I myself, an example of this, my dad's white and my mom's Lumbee. My husband's dad is black and his mom's Lumbee. So we end up, at least I can say for myself, ended up being what people might consider racially ambiguous. And in the context of the United States, this is a problem. People just don't know what to do with you because we love our categories. So you get asked stupid questions like, what are you? And then when you answer, people don't believe you. Again, Indians are unexpected and misunderstood on this particular landscape. So I feel like the work I did with these young people was particularly important in reminding them who they are and that they have a long history here and a right to be here and a lot of things to be proud of. And those kids are mostly all grown now. That's how old that picture was. So they made it. Okay, so getting to the project now at hand. The first organized effort of Lumbee people in Baltimore was to create a church. And this is the home of the oldest congregation established by Lumbee people in the city. It is South Broadway Baptist Church at 211 South Broadway. pretty much at the heart of that map I showed earlier on the former reservation, as it was called. And Lumbees are pervasively Southern Baptist or Methodist. We are church-going people, whether you believe or not. Going to church is kind of just a function of community. It's part of your cultural practice and identity at this point. And so I grew up going to this church, and I had done a lot of work with young people, as you saw, done some projects with my elders. And then one day, Sunday morning in Sunday school, this is my teacher, Sister Linda Cox, who is also Lumbee from North Carolina. If you're not familiar, Sunday school is grouped by age. So I'm in her class with a bunch of people who are about my same age, mostly all Lumbee people from Baltimore. I started to look around and I thought, it's time I do something with my own generation as a community-based visual artist. And Baltimore has a lot of ways of telling us that we don't belong here, we don't deserve a good quality of life, or that we don't have even history or culture, in that, until recently, it hasn't been reflected to us by any means. And I started to look around at the class at all these people I grew up with my whole life. And to start class, Sister Linda would always have us hold hands and stand in a circle and pray, right? And we would start by thanking the Lord for something. Each one thanks God for something. And a lot of times people will say, oh, I thank the Lord for this day, or I thank the Lord for bringing me in to Sunday school today. And sometimes you hear like the same thing over and over and over again. You start to think, oh, I'll come up with something original. Thank God for something else. But on this particular morning, as people were saying, I thank the Lord for waking me up this morning. I thank the Lord for bringing me to church this morning. I started to think about how incredible it is that God does see fit to continue to wake us up and bring us together as a group of people, because we have all grown up in different difficult circumstances as Lumbee people in Baltimore. We are now in every walk of life, and every kind of occupation or no occupation, state of health. Some of us have been through personal tragedy, like being shot or imprisoned, or anything you can imagine. It is a complete miracle that God sees fit to continue to wake us up and bring us together. Should thank him. And so I thought, what could I do to sort of remind us that we are beautiful and important and strong and part of this legacy and this thing that's so much bigger than ourselves. And I thought, well, I would like to do a series of portraits, collaborate with people from my generation on a series of portraits to do just that. Now, at the same time, I was looking at our features. Lumbees come from a diverse set of ancestors, and we do have a distinct look. Sometimes people can look at us and say, we come in every color, we have every texture of hair, every eye color, and we don't match the stereotype that you see in the movies of what an American Indian should look like, which, by the way, that's exactly what it is, a stereotype. Very few Indians look like what you see on TV. And so I referenced the Exquisite Corpse game, which is played by the surrealists in their movement. They would throw these parties, and they'd fold up a piece of paper. One person would draw on the paper and pass it to the next person, who would open it up and draw, and so on. And they get this composite drawing at the end that nobody knows what it's going to look like till you open it up, right? So I made the Exquisite Lumbee book, where I collaborated with this group of people from my generation and a photographer to get headshots and back of headshots, and slit the pages along our features so that you could kind of play with interchanging them, and then you can come up with any number of exquisite Lumbees, right? You make a whole new Lumbee, still beautiful. And I think it helps people to realize that though we come in every color, with every hair texture, every eye color, we do have a distinctive look, and we are beautiful. right? So this is the book that's in the collection. It's Sloan now and in the show. The portraits that go with the book, they were taken in a photography studio. I collaborated with the ones that are featured in the series, 29 of my peers, and we were all about the same age, I think all about 30. And I told everybody, please wear what you like best. Not too much more instruction than that. And people were borrowing cars and doing whatever they could to get this photography studio in groups of about 5 or 6. And the best part of it at that point was the person having their picture taken was posing, right? But everybody else was on the other side of the camera, like, you're killing it. Now do this, now do that. Like, you're doing so good. And then I had also given them surveys with questions that were meant to elicit pride or positive thoughts about their own lives. Like, what's special about being Lumbee? What's special about being Lumbee from Baltimore? What's the best thing you ever did in your life? What are you proudest of? And then I took text from those surveys and incorporated them into the portraits. And you can see like everybody's style and, you know, just how they'd like to present themselves, the way they want to be seen, I think comes through. So there's 30 of these portraits in all. I really like Jeremy's because he kept his sunglasses on. And they were always intended to be life-size. The original prints weren't quite, because I was actually, this is student work. I was a grad student. This is my MFA thesis. And I didn't have the funding I needed to do it the way it should be done, but eventually they got there. You know, people are artists. They're creative. They do have style. Like, we have a style. Keith here is the only person who participated who wanted to be photographed in his regalia. I found that to be quite interesting. And then after the project, as people were seeing the portraits slowly come out, they were like, oh, could I redo mine? Can I retake mine in my regalia? And it's like, no. So then the best part of this project was the opening, because everybody got dressed up and they wanted to come out and see themselves being celebrated in this gallery that was removed from that neighborhood where we all live. Like, it wasn't on the reservation, it was over on Charles Street. It was a big deal in the Mount Vernon neighborhood of Baltimore, which is kind of ritzy compared to where Indians have lived since they got here. And I knew the project was a success because everybody wanted, at first, their portrait to be their Facebook profile picture. And then after the opening, everybody wanted a picture with their portrait, and that was their Facebook picture. So you can see people posing with themselves here at the first opening. Since then, the project just won't die. It's been everywhere. Here it is in the Trickster Gallery in Schaumburg, Illinois, some years ago. It's been to Florida and Pennsylvania, and eventually the original portraits, I was invited by the Department of Southeast American Indian Studies at University of North Carolina, Pembroke, which used to be our tribal school, to install them in their department. And I thought that was really cool. So like for years and years, they were hanging in the conference room there, and people would sometimes visit, and people would send me pictures of famous people looking at them. Like, here's Bobby Dews and McGeezy Personnel. You might recognize them from Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls. They worked on Prey. So like other Native artists stopping through to see the work, which is really cool. Some Lumbee royalty after one of the powwows stopping through and posing with the pictures. People going to North Carolina finding themselves in the gallery, and you know, it just goes on and on. So that's that project. And here's my email address and my social media handle if you'd like to reach out to me, and we can have conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Everyone in the audience, I will invite you to share your questions. Again, please put them into the Q&A box area in Zoom. And as we're waiting for folks to chime in there with questions, Ashley, I was hoping that this is not the only project you've done that has included an artist's book, although you're not sort of primarily a book artist. You do a lot of different work. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what about these projects, you touched on this for Exquisite Lumbee, but sort of what about these projects lends themselves to making books out of them, and how that fit into the rest of your art practice, any challenges you ran into, and forays into bookmaking as part of your art practice.
Well, I think the Exquisite Corpse book form is just fun, and that's kind of what I wanted to bring to this project and this subject that can evoke a lot of hard feelings and just shame and doubt and all the junk that surrounds people questioning your identity in a place where nobody looks like you, right? So I thought it would be nice to have a form that people could handle and play with and manipulate. And it's a large book, like that actually was close to life size. So those headshots and back of headshots in the book are close to life size. It's like holding faces in your hands. Which also, makes folks vulnerable, right? Like, what are people going to do with this book? But it's such a carefully constructed, nicely constructed object that I've never seen anybody mistreat it or be, mean to the people pictured there. I think they're kind of revered as being exquisite. I've always liked artist books. I like that form in my work. I am a bibliophile anyway. I guess like whatever form my work takes depends on the objective I have in mind when I'm working on it, and it's always a question of audience, right? So I didn't specialize in school. Like I wasn't a painting major, I wasn't a printmaking major, I didn't even concentrate in anything. I have an undergraduate degree in general fine art because I like to do it all. And it seems like my practice is so interdisciplinary and all-inclusive that probably was the best fit for me. Like my last big project ended up being a website and another kind of a book, like a print guide to East Baltimore's historic American Indian reservation. Has, it involved graphic design, web design, photography, and of course I was working with a team of people. Like I don't have all of these skills, but some of them I do. It could take any form. Like, do I love drawing and painting best? Probably in artist books, but I feel like it's as much a part of my practice as anything else.
Great, thank you. We have lots of questions rolling in, so I'll share them with you. To start in the beginning, there's a question: is there a possibility that the Exquisite Lumbee exhibit will travel again?
I don't know, maybe. So like the portraits that were hanging in the conference room at UNCP, that space was recently renovated, and I found out they're actually in storage in the museum there, and the curator was considering installing them, for another show, like another round there. There are some hanging permanently, I believe, in the Center for the Study of the American South at UNC Chapel Hill. They were finally reproduced at the scale they were always meant to be, and they're big and beautiful, and you should go check them out if you can. I think there's 2 inside the center. And that was as a result of Melinda Maynor Lowry's support when she released her most recent book. And there's a couple more from that session that are available here in Baltimore, but it's weird. Like I almost feel like I don't want to show them for a while because they have been in constant rotation. It's been a little bit over 10 years now, y'all. Like, it's not the only project I ever did, but I guess it's a good one because people still want to see it.
The next question you just partially answered, and I can partially answer, but the question is the book, photos, and exhibit in a permanent collection somewhere, safe and sound? So the book is in our collection here at Sloan Art Library, UNC Chapel Hill, and I'll just share for our audience that currently it's on display in Wilson as part of this exhibition. And once that exhibit comes down, it'll be back here in the art library, and we are open to the public, and anyone can come in and spend time with it. Do you have
Yeah.
anything else to add about where the photos are?
Just that it makes me really happy that Sloan was interested in acquiring that book in particular, because from what I understand, art students can go in and touch it, and well, you said publicly accessible, but I think that's really cool. Like, that's where I want it to live. I don't want it to be hermetically sealed somewhere or like away from people. It needs to be interacted with.
Yeah. We do ask people to wash hands, take some basic precautions, but yeah, our collection is, we want people to come in and see the works. I've had a chance to sit down with that book, so I look forward to, anyone in the audience, I look forward to welcoming you here to look at it in the future. The next question is about your research process. Could you talk a little bit? So it says, I'm curious about your research process. Could you talk a little bit about your challenges from Robeson County to Baltimore?
Well, there's so much research. I guess the backbone of all of it is oral history, right? So I think that really is what's behind all of my work as a scholar now and as an artist, and I approach everything as an artist. So kind of like even what I'm doing that people would say, oh, that's humanities, or that's scholarship, or that's research, that's all, I guess, part of my artistic practice now as well. What's behind it are stories. And I'll talk usually to my elders and see what they have to say about a particular topic. Like, what was it like living on the farm? What was it like sharecropping tobacco? Why did you come to Baltimore? What did it look like when you got here? What changed since then? That's been a lot of that, because my most recent work has been about why was there this whole reservation in the 1950s, and then by the time I'm born in the 1980s, we have a busted up Indian center and can't find any other Indians, around. It's nothing like what it was. So what happened? What did you experience? And then from the stories, because the neighborhood is so different, what I was asking about, I couldn't like see what I was being told. I went into archives and tried to confirm what I was being told, like any documentation to support that there was this whole community here, or, this is what we had, this is who was here, is what they were doing. And I found it, right, with the help of librarians and archivists who are my heroes. And then sometimes research means walking around. Like, really, you have to go be in a place, you have to touch it, you have to understand what it means to walk from point A to point B at this time of day. Like, even walking around with my photographer, who is one of my best friends, Sean Scheit. He's a professional photographer, but we also went to high school together, and we've collaborated our whole lives now. Even though he left me and moved to LA, walking around with him, looking at the places, looking for a thing that I was never looking for on my own. We're looking for light. What does it mean to be here at this time versus that time? Why can I take this side of the street now and have to come back and get the other side later or a different day? Right? It's a phenomenological experience. Like, you start to understand who you are in the context of this place by spending time there, how big you are, how small you are, what you look like in the whole mix of people. And that is a very busy, diverse neighborhood that's always in transition. And that's a thing I learned too. Neighborhoods always change. Communities are always changing. Beyond that, of course, there's a lot of reading and writing and thinking and checking and rechecking with community, because the kind of work I do, I'm accountable, right? Like, I'm representing always, even if I don't mean to be, so much more than myself. So I want to make sure I'm doing that in an honorable and a respectful way. And that involves a lot of conversation and checking in.
We have a pivot to what's your next project?
I'm so glad you asked. So if y'all want to take a look at baltimorereservation.com to see that work I've been talking about with researching the neighborhood, you'll see that we really focused on buildings in the neighborhood, right? Like it was all about finding out what Indian business was here or what Indian family lived here, and now they don't, and now it looks completely different. While we were doing archival research, the best pictures we found, I mean, sure, the buildings were exciting. We found pictures of people, like our heroes are the ones who made what we have today. And now I'm working with two other Lumbee people from Baltimore. Well, one of them was born in North Carolina and has lived in Baltimore most of his life. Tiffany Chavis, who was a social worker and is now a librarian, and Stanton Lewis, who works in construction, so not curators by trade. And we are co-curating an online photo exhibition of these archival photos of our community people. And it's called Safety in Numbers, Portraits of East Baltimore's Reservation, and it's going to be appended to baltimorereservation.com, and it's opening on March 9th. And we're now scrambling to get all the pieces together when we're not working our regular 9-to-5 jobs.
Exciting. I look forward to looking at that. That sounds amazing. And there was someone else asked, are you working on a project now? So you just answered that question.
And
Are
a
there other
book.
projects you want to share?
Yeah, and a book. Now I have this wonderful position with the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, and their press has been very helpful in the process of securing a contract to get a book out about all this stuff. So that should happen pretty soon. And it's my dissertation book that will be so much better than my dissertation.
Congratulations on that project. That's awesome. Does the Smithsonian acquire artist books?
I don't know if our unit does. That's a good question. I know there is a collection, but the Smithsonian is huge.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty new there. I'm still figuring it out myself, but that's a good thing to look into.
But the Museum of the American Indian does not, to your knowledge.
Not sure. I'm actually not sure.
Great. Another question, I think this is going back to the Exquisite Lumbee project, but the question is, have you had an exhibition of your work on this subject at UNC Chapel Hill?
Yep. The portraits that are still hanging there are actually left over from that exhibition, and it was joint show with Alicia Locklear Monroe, who's a wonderful Lumbee artist. She showed paintings and I showed the portraits from the Exquisite Lumbee series. And at the same time, Melinda launched her most recent book, and we just had a great time. And then two Exquisite Lumbees live there now.
And more questions keep rolling in, so I'm just going to keep sharing them with you.
I'm glad, y'all, because I haven't talked about that work in so long, and I thought it was going to take me a little longer than it did. So keep them coming.
So there's a thanks, and also, do you have a favorite aspect of your creative process?
Favorite aspect? Well, I love talking to my elders, always. That's always a good time. They're the funniest and the smartest. And I want to point out the fact that many of these folks grew up farming, sharecropping or otherwise, and it was very difficult for them to make it through a school year or to get an education beyond a very early age in some cases. So a lot of them are not fully literate or learn to read later in life, and they are still the smartest people I know. Like, they know everything. I had a cousin, James Bowen, who recently passed away. He was in his 80s. One time I had occasion to do something at the White House, and I mentioned it to him. He was like, "Oh yeah, you go here and there." Like he knew the layout of the White House, like things you would not expect. They know all about, um, and just always good stories. The stories, I guess, are the best part of my creative practice, getting to listen to and make those. I also like listening to music a lot. That's always going. I like a lot of American roots music, and I like walking to think through things. I used to like driving really far, like to North Carolina and back, while listening to the music and listening to stories, but then the pandemic happened, so I spend a lot of time walking around my neighborhood.
Looks like we have some Smithsonian librarians in the audience, and so there's a collection of significant collection of artist books, but I'm sure.
Wonderful.
So there's a link in the chat about that. And a question: have you thought of gathering the same individuals from the Exquisite Lumbee series and doing a series of photos of them as they are today? Kind of a follow-up.
I hadn't. I sure hadn't, and it would be interesting to do that, because 10 years later, people look a lot different. Life has happened. We've all gone in different directions. Thankfully, everyone's still living. So it could happen. It could happen. Maybe that's something to consider.
You've referenced other projects though, so maybe that would be a continuation of this one. I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more, if you're willing to talk about it, about the oral histories and kind of work with community archives, because I know that is also something that you've done adjacent to your art practice.
Sure. Well, I guess maybe I'll tell you about how I got started with oral history. Again, I was in grad school at MICA, and they invited a folklorist in to work with us, and her name is Dr. Elaine F. She is a former Baltimore City folklorist and a co-founder of Maryland Traditions, which is our state folk life program, and she's been a force in my life since I've met her, certainly, and done a lot of good, in the landscape of heritage here. She came into our class and she showed us Tascam recorders, like flash recorders, which was, the technology of the day. Very, very cool. And we got the fancy headphones, professional headphones, where you can hear, if you go into somebody's house, you have to ask them to turn the refrigerator off because you can hear it running. It was amazing, right? And we got a tutorial on how to use the equipment and some basic instructions about how to do an interview. And she sent us home and said, I want you to go record somebody, come back with a 5-minute story, and we're going to listen to them in class. So I was like, okay. And at this age, I was painfully shy. So I thought I knew what I wanted to do. I walked across the street from my parents' house to my Uncle John, who's also Lumbee. And he's a great storyteller. And I said, hey, can I record you telling me a story for homework? He's like, sure. What do you want to hear? And I was like, whatever you want to tell me. So Uncle John, who was a big part of South Broadway Baptist Church and a fervent believer, he was a Christian, he decided to tell me the story of when he got saved. And he was driving a truck across country and said he was falling asleep at the wheel and listening to Don Gibson on the radio and slapping himself to stay awake. And all of a sudden God spoke to him and he became saved, and his life was different ever since. And it was a great story. If you want to hear it, it's on my website. I came back to class at art school, where people are very liberal, of course, myself included. And, everybody went before me. I went dead last. I was so nervous to play this recording. And then it ended up being the recording, of course, of Uncle John talking about coming to find Jesus and getting saved and changing his life. And there was just dead silence after he stopped talking. And all of a sudden, Elaine, Dr. F, was like, amen. And she's Jewish. And everybody in the class was like, that was awesome. And I was like, this is the best, people like Uncle John's stories as much as I do. I know a bunch of people who tell great stories like this, and I feel like if other people will celebrate them, if they get to hear the stories, then I want to be the person that gets to uplift those stories and help them get recognition for the lives that they've lived. So it turned out I did a whole series of oral histories with Lumbee elders, and again, without much prompting, they all told me a story that in one way or another involved work, because work was what brought them out of North Carolina to Baltimore. And that series ended up also being a series of artist books. You collected one of them. Um, and it was called Lumbee Legends. And then later, some more folklorists found out about it, and they were like, well, we think you should have an exhibition at the Baltimore Museum of Industry because nobody knows that Lumbees contributed to the workforce here. And so we did. And then that one lives on and on and on. But or since that time, oral history has always been like my go-to. Like, you know, I make crankies. If you're not familiar with that, it's another kind of artist book. It's usually a scroll of paper or some other material that you physically crank through a viewing mechanism. So I did one about the time my dad stole Uncle John's chocolate cake at the church. It was hilarious. I mean, that's kind of the work I want to be doing right now, like working just with the stories and lifting up and illustrating them. The other stuff I'm doing, I think it's great and I'm proud of it, and I do it because it needs to be done. But the stuff that's really fun and exciting to me is that.
Another question that has come in as someone has written, I can't help but see parallels between your work and Wendy Red Star's artwork of drawn on archival portrait photos, although there are many differences. Does her work influence or feed your process in any way?
You know, I'm just coming to know the work of Wendy Red Star. Some of her work is in our collection at NMAI, and I was just actually searching through the Forge project up in New York collections yesterday and checking her stuff out. So I wouldn't say that it's influenced me or fed my process because I haven't been aware of it so much as of yet, but now I realize that we're totally in conversation and I need to be paying attention.
And we do have time for a few more questions. So everyone in the audience, please feel free to write in if you think of other things. And I just wanted to say, Ashley, that I'm really excited about how you talk about the kind of engaging with stories and the artwork that you do with stories. One thing that we have been doing here at UNC is trying to encourage engagement of artists with archives. So we have a program where students can apply for funding for an award to work in the archives, art students. Anyway, it's exciting to like hear that synergy in your own work and an inspiration, I think, for a lot of people. So
yeah, let me just put a plug in for even if you're not an art student and even if you're not close to the Sloan, which that's amazing. What a great opportunity. Like go to the library, y'all. Most of the work for my dissertation was done with a public library card and I had access to the university and all that. But free information and people who are just there to help you connect to it. I mean, librarians and archivists are my heroes. I'll keep saying it forever. They're so nice and so knowledgeable and so talented, and you know, go make friends. I'm gonna chat a link to go check out the oral histories from years ago on my website if anybody's interested. Maybe one of the facilitators can reshare it.
let Katie take care of that. Thank you. Somebody's asked, what is your dream project?
Dude, I don't know. I need, you know what? I'm in a place in my life where I really need to pause and reflect on the last few big things that happened so I can think about what I want to come next. I'm about to turn 40. So Exquisite Lumbees, we were all about 30. Now I'm about to be 40. I'm a new mom. I'm a new curator at the Smithsonian, and my life looks very different than it did when I made the work we were talking about today. So I don't know what it is now. I mean, the world looks different, right? Like we're still coming through a pandemic. I don't know. I I don't know. I need to think about it. It'd be a good time for a residency.
Um, a much smaller question, but about do you have a connection to UNC Pembroke beyond the project, displaying the project there?
Well, my grandfather went there, but it was a different name at the time, and some of my relatives were founders. For example, my grandfather, who was James A. Sampson Sr., you saw him in the picture in his World War II uniform. He was raised by his grandparents, who were, okay, this is a very Lumbee thing, y'all. So all the Lumbees are like, who? Um, trying to this is how we understand who we are to each other. So my grandfather, James A. Sampson Sr., was raised by his grandparents, Willie Foster Sampson and Callie Lowry. Willie's brother was Reverend Oscar Sampson, who was very influential figure in tribal politics in the town of Pembroke and with the founding of the school. And of course, I have a bunch of really great friends and colleagues who work there. Shout out to Dr. Lawrence Locklear and Nancy Strickland Fields, and more folks who I know and love and visit every time I'm in town.
There's a comment in the Q&A, just congrats on being 40 and being a mom and on the Smithsonian job. All great things.
Hey, thank you. Right? It's not what I was expecting, but I really like it. Somebody commented about Melinda Maynor Lowry's collection with the Southern Folklife collection. I just want to put a plug in for Dr. Melinda Maynor Lowry, who's one of my sheroes in life. Check out all of her work. She has 2 excellent books out that I think are the best things available on the history and heritage of our people. If you take some time, even her most recent book, Lumbee Indians and American Struggle, the National Endowment for the Humanities made that widely available digitally, I think for free. So check her out for sure. She's now a professor at Emory University and kicking ass and making films. She's also a filmmaker. She's also a mom. So an inspiration to me in every way.
Are there any other recent projects or works? I know that your portfolio is much more wide ranging than we were able to touch on today. But are there other projects that you'd like to share a little bit about in our last few minutes?
I guess I could say a couple words about the book project, because this is the one where I'm going to have to think through really what I've done. A lot of people comment that my methodology is so unique and interesting, and that I should spell it out so that other people might be able to use it in their work or in their community. And I think that's a great idea, and it's really hard to do, because not that artists are not planners or researchers or thoughtful about their methodology, because I think we absolutely are. I think I have intuition and ethics, and they guide me to make the decisions that I make about my approaches to my work. And I don't know, like, how do you explain how you arrived at the right thing? Like, a lot of it's trial and error. Like, you do something, it doesn't work, and then you get advice about what would be a better thing to try next. It just, like, thinking through that is tough, and in art and in scholarship, what people might not consider art, but I guess I do, because I'm thinking about it the same way. So that's where I am. And I guess in a couple years, you'll be able to read all about it. But if you have advice or ideas for me, you can always reach me in the meantime. I'm pretty findable. And I know we just have a few minutes left, so I'd like to say once again, thank you, Alice and Josh and Katie and the Sloan Library for acquiring this work and giving it a life beyond what it would have had, you know, in some storage unit in Baltimore, and for inviting me to be in conversation with you today.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and for sharing, and for the work that you make. We're really excited and proud to have it as part of our collection and in the current exhibit, which I hope folks who are local to Chapel Hill will take some time to go look at.
Thank you so much.
Great. I'll just check in with Katie, see if there are any last questions from the Q&A in our last couple minutes.
Katie says we're amazing.
All right. Well, thank you again, Ashley. This has been wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us as well.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Alice.